Hello. In this video lecture, we are going to discuss the promotional branch of the marketing mix. Um, uh, I'd like to start with speaking about the communications process in general. Um, when we want to communicate, I don't know if you've ever thought about how you think. We tend not to actually think in words. We tend to think in abstracts and visuals and emotions. Um, it's usually not until we contemplate communication that we actually start to think in terms of words. So we take our abstract thoughts, encode them into a code or language. We then transmit that message or content to our audience where they decode it. And hopefully they decode it correctly. Um, we all have had the experience where we've tried to speak to someone who doesn't understand our language, or someone speaking to us when we don't understand theirs. But I assume that we all speak English here, so that shouldn't be a problem, except sometimes it is, because we don't exactly speak exactly the same language. We often use slang terms or jargon. Slang is language which is used by a certain segment of the population, but not the entire population. Um, and it also changes over time. For instance, if I use the slang term sawbuck or C note, most people will not be familiar with these terms, at least unless they're of an older age. Um, the expression off the hook at one point meant kind of was something cool or something hip. It was great. It was a positive thing. But it also can mean getting out of something, like a fish getting off the hook, or I got called for jury duty and I got off the hook. Um, and many of you will be familiar with many slang terms that I'm probably not familiar with. And so that can be somewhat problematic. Then we have jargon, and jargon is language in which is used by a certain profession or industry or professional group. For instance, the medical profession has all sorts of jargon, CBC Chem 7, which is a series of blood tests, or I go to the doctor and he tells me I have a subcutaneous hematoma. And I wanted to ask the doctor, how long do I have to live? I mean, actually, it's blood under the skin, something when I was a kid we called a boo-boo, So we have to be aware of different aspects of language when we're trying to communicate. Now, here's a question I often ask students: should we use jargon and slang, or should we stay away from it? Actually, it depends. It depends upon the audience you're speaking to. Who's in your target audience, your target market? If I am speaking to a medical audience, I would say subcutaneous hematoma, but if I'm speaking to a bunch of kindergartners, I'll say a boo-boo. So you really want to tailor your language and your word choices to your audience. The worst thing you could do is use language, misuse the language, misuse the slang or the jargon, which then you lose all credibility. So the assembling of a message is very important for any type of communication, whether it's promotional or otherwise. All right, so we've encoded our message, we've transmitted it, and hopefully our audience will decode it correctly. However, at the same time, we also send other signals. And these signals may be intentional or unintentional, and they're completely simultaneous. The most obvious one would be body language. If someone stands or sits in a certain way or holds themselves, in a certain way, that can communicate something. And if the body language contradicts the content or the text of the communication, that would, people would tend to believe the body language because it's subconscious or unconscious. Other things that might take this into account, eye contact, um, what people wear. Um, this is why when we do TV commercials, a lot of attention is paid to what the models or actors would wear in an ad. It might be to dress up or to dress down. Um, it might be to make somebody look like they are natural in a specific type of environment. So we want to be aware of this. And we do, judge when we meet somebody, we actually make a judgment about them in the first 7 seconds, and what they wear is also a big deal. That contributes to that judgment. Some other things, eye contact, um, also things like hygiene. And by hygiene, I just don't mean whether somebody took a bath or not, but also, for instance, hairstyles. Certain hairstyles will, we make certain judgments based on hairstyle. Whether it's nice and neat or whether it's casual and loose. These are part of the signals that we send. For women, it's often cosmetics. Somebody actually, I had this horrible experience one time. I was showing somebody around an office that I worked in, and we went around a corner, and this person turned to me and says, "Why is there a prostitute in here?" And I was horrified that he actually thought one of our secretaries was a prostitute. And he was completely off base. But I kind of, on a certain level, understand it. This secretary had very heavy eye makeup. She had a big hair. Some people thought maybe a little over the top, and he was completely wrong. But that signal that she was sending, he completely misread. And I think, we have to be careful of these sort of things. For men, it's their facial hair. These days, a lot of men are wearing beards, but you know, there's a difference between growing a beard and just not shaving. And I had a colleague who was that we had something called Dress Down Fridays, when we were kind of moving from a more formal attire in the office to more casual, and they were kind of testing it by doing it on Fridays first. And I had this colleague, actually somebody who reported to me, just not shave on Fridays. Now, and I had to pull him aside because he was one of these guys who had a 5 o'clock shadow at 8 o'clock in the morning. And so I had to pull him over and said, "Hey, this is Dress Down Friday, not I don't give a damn Friday." And he was a little annoyed at me, but especially since I had a beard. He said, "You have a beard." I said, if you want to grow a beard, but you're just not shaving, and that sends a signal. And you represent me, and you also represent our department, so shave. Now we're still friends. We've both left that company, but we still occasionally get together. My friend is now, my friend is now a contractor, a housing contractor, and does renovations. And we met in a bar one night, and he's telling me, it's funny. Whenever I meet with the client and I haven't shaved, they treat me very differently. And I go, "Duh, remember we talked about that years ago." Obviously, we talk about hygiene. If somebody doesn't shower or they smell, that is going to make an impact too. Also, the venue in which they appear is very important. That's why we pay so much attention to sets or locations when putting commercials together, because we want that message to come out of a certain venue. Think about politicians, for instance. When they announce they're running for office, they always tend to do it in front of the state house or a courthouse or something like that, or a formal sort of high prestige background. Now there are contradictions to that. I mean, not contradictions, but there are people have taken a different path sometimes. For instance, Barack Obama, when he accepted the Democratic nomination for president, he did his acceptance speech not in the convention hall, but in a park, and he wanted people around him. He wanted to have people seen behind him, so he'd be a man of the people. At the same time, Elizabeth Warren, when she announced that she was running for president, she did it from her kitchen via a webcam or some sort of camera, and she she was drinking a beer. She was somebody who was trying to make herself seem more relatable, and so she did it from her kitchen, when her husband was there and that sort of thing. I don't know that it really worked very well, but I understand what she was trying to do. So these are all things we need to take into account, and in the production of advertising or any other promotional communications, we need to pay attention to these things. And this is why we have stylists and hairstylists and clothing stylists and makeup stylists and location scouts and things like that to make everything work together in our communications. We also have to be aware of something called static or noise, and this is anything that interferes with the communication of our message, or the transmission of our message. It might be, let's say we're in a room and I'm giving a talk and there's construction going on outside with a lot of noise. That would be an example of static. Or if I'm trying to listen to the radio or a podcast or something and there's crackling, or watching TV and there's pixelation or snow or some other electronic interference. This is an example of static or noise. In addition, we also have filters, and filters are internal in our heads. For instance, if somebody is hungry, they may not pay attention to your message as well, or if they've had a fight with their significant other, or that sort of thing. They're distracted, bothered by something. Or it may be that they have a bias or a prejudice relative to the message that you're sending. And these are things that we need to be aware of. And can we identify biases and prejudices, and can we get around them? And it's not always that easy, but we do need to be aware of it in our communication process. In terms of promotion or integrated marketing communications, and it should be integrated, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Probably the branch that most people are familiar with is advertising, and this is paid mass media that is used to promote a product, good, or service, or maybe an experience. The term advertising is often used in two different ways. Sometimes it is used in place of the word promotion in a broad sense, that anything promotional is considered advertising. But for our purposes, advertising is paid mass media that promotes a product or service. So we have to pay for our message to go there, and it appears. And we're going to try to confine our discussion when we use the word advertising to that. So we have to understand that the word is used in two different ways, but we're going to stick with the more specific term. In addition to that, we have public relations. And public relations is where we try to build good relations with various publics. We want to build a desirable image for our company and our products. Public relations kind of cuts different ways, different views. Often public relations in an organization doesn't tend to fall under the marketing department, and that can be somewhat problematic. I know of some public relations people who don't really, it's almost like they don't realize they're part of the marketing function in any way, and that can be somewhat, again, problematic. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to convince third parties through public relations to promote our product. We want influencers to affect opinions. For instance, if I'm a spokesperson and I'm holding up a product, this is the product I'm selling, and I'm telling, as a spokesperson, I'm telling you how wonderful it is. Okay, and then let's say you're on a bus and you hear somebody talking to somebody next to them about, oh yeah, I just tried this product. It's really, it was really good. Who do you give more credibility to? Well, my guess is that you give more credibility to the person on the bus because their opinion was not, they had no vested interest in that opinion, in expressing that opinion. Whereas the spokesperson, may be an actor who's being paid. So we want to influence the general public and other publics, uh, preferably ahead of time. It is much better to undertake proactive public relations as opposed to reactive public relations. When I say reactive, often people don't consider much about public relations until there's a crisis, until there's something that's gone wrong. And you want to be very careful about that because often any efforts at that point are perceived as exactly what that is, a reaction, and is not. People are already developing a negative view before you try to get in there with your positive message. And we'll talk more about public relations later in the course. We also have personal sales, and this is when this is for personal presentations by a company's sales force. There is nothing more powerful than a human being making a presentation in real time, face to face, where they can react to concerns or objections. They can answer questions that maybe an ad or promotional piece does not answer. Unfortunately, salespeople are expensive. They want to be paid their salaries, and they want the benefits and any other expenses that salespeople entail. And we'll talk more about salespeople, a sales force later on in the course as well. Sales promotions are short-term incentives to encourage sales. If you buy two, you get a free gift, or you buy now, get a free gift. Also, sales promotions are often, the term is used as sort of a catch-all for a lot of other things. For instance, gratuity items or premium items. For instance, this cup it's actually from the Rutgers Graduate School of Management, where I went to school. They gave me this as a way to promote the school. They gave it to me before I signed, so they're trying to, give me free stuff to make them sign. And I'm sure you've received pens with. I'm sure you have a pen with the college's name on it. I'm sure you have, stuff you've obtained, free T-shirts and other things that will promote a particular product, and that product might be a concert or maybe a physical product or maybe a service. I actually, sometimes we call this swag. At one point, I was, for a little bit, the king of swag at the company I worked at. And, one of my favorites actually was hats. I have, I kind of like, it was like a billboard we'd put on somebody's forehead. So I would love to give away those caps, and there are other things, toys, and I remember oven mitts was something that we got into, and aprons, and all sorts of giveaway items, little knives with the product's name on it and things like that. And this area, the next area is direct marketing. This is where you're targeting customers directly with direct communications. And what's really great about it is that you get to measure the response very easily. I send out so many offers, and I get so many responses, and it's a percentage, it's a response rate. And I can experiment with that, and I can do all sorts of things. It is the oldest form of promotion and the newest, because it originally started with catalogs and things like that. And now, thanks to technology, the internet, and other advances, it really is a very up-to-date tool, and we'll talk more about this. Now, I often get the question, where does social media fall? Is it advertising? Is it public relations? I had one person, the dean of one business school, tell me he thought it was personal sales. I kind of disagreed with that, but that's, not the point. Some people say it's part of direct marketing. Uh, and no one's really made, there's no real consensus on that. So I would say, let's make that a sixth branch. We can do that. Admittedly, there is advertising on social media platforms, so that should be considered advertising. But we also create word of mouth, so that could be considered part of public relations. There is prospecting for personal sales pitches. Can be done on social media, as well as sales promotions and certainly direct marketing. So it's kind of a little bit of everything. And so we might as well just make it a sixth branch. But these are, what I have on the screen now are the 5 traditional branches of promotion. There are all sorts of advertisers, different types. The ones we're most familiar with would be manufacturers. Nike and Dell and Apple, and they all make physical products. Then, of course, there are service providers, doctors, lawyers, accountants, people who service your car, people who will do your taxes, people who will maybe do your lawn, I don't know, cut your lawn, any sort of service provider. And so these are both more typical types of advertisers. Also resellers, both wholesalers and retailers, people who, store owners will do advertising as well. Not-for-profits or nonprofits will also can be big advertisers. Charities, as well as other groups such as professional groups and things like that. Actually, when I started my consultancy, I expected most of my clients to be manufacturers or service providers, and surprisingly, most of them turned out to be not-for-profit organizations. Not all charities, but I did do some provide services for service providers and manufacturers, but I was surprised at how much profit for me there was in not-for-profit. Seems ironic, but there's a lot of activity that, if you're running a charity, you need to promote your charity. So it makes sense. The government actually also does a fair bit of advertising. Probably most prominent would be the U.S. military. You may be familiar with some of the slogans: "Be all you can be," "An army of one," "See the world," that sort of thing. The states will also advertise various programs. They're not necessarily advertising to sell. You generally, if you're in a certain location, you don't get your choice of governments, but the government does do a lot of promotion. Political groups also. Now that's different from governments, because governments are not allowed to promote individual candidates. So it could be candidates or activists, people who are trying to get a certain referendum passed, or a certain something else passed, or people who are just trying to promote a cause. And this kind of folds into not-for-profits as well. But political groups tend to be a specific, a very distinct group. I have only worked on one political campaign, and it cured me of that inclination. I worked on the Hoboken City Council race. I had no skin in the game. I never lived in Hoboken, but they hired me as a hired gun, and working with political groups can be very messy. I have worked with other groups that are close to being political, not quite as bad, but anyway. We also have different types of marketing communications agencies. Sometimes they're referred to as Marcom agencies. The most obvious is the traditional full-service ad agency, where they pretty much do everything. They will do the creative work. They will do maybe some of the strategic thinking, perhaps. They will buy the media. They maybe do some market research. And they'll do many other things that you'll see later on this list. So, and this is, if you've ever seen the television show Mad Men. It portrays a full-service ad agency from the 1960s. So you have to, if you watch it, you have to take into account it's from the 1960s, both in the terms of people's behavior, but also the services they offer. At that time, television was exploding, and there was no internet, but so forth. You will occasionally come across what's called a boutique agency. A boutique agency is an agency but it primarily focuses on the creative work, the copywriting and the art direction. Less so than the media buying. When we say buying media, I'm talking about buying space in a newspaper or time on TV, that sort of thing. So boutique, many full-service ad agencies started as boutique agencies. In fact, many times full-service ad agencies might outsource some of the work to boutique agencies. So basically, we're talking primarily issue of size, but the boutique agency would not necessarily do the market research or a lot of other things. Design agencies is another variation. Design agencies tend to focus on the visual. They are people who create logos, to do a lot of logo design, graphics for trade shows. Some might do package design. That's kind of a slightly different area. That's not really promotion, but they will dabble their fingers in it. They will do a lot of identity graphics. And sometimes there's a fine line between a design agency and a boutique agency, but there it is. Then we have media buying groups, which is sort of the opposite. The media buying groups don't do anything creative. They just buy space and time. Time on television and radio, space on websites and in print publications. What has happened over the last several decades is the development of these huge advertising or promotional holding companies. And there's a couple, I think there's about 5 of them. The WPP group, the Saatchi group, and there's a few others. And what they did is they just bought up agencies. And the idea of getting global reach. And I remember when I was calling on agencies to get work, I remember there was one called Dancer Fitzgerald and Sample. It was an agency I remember it was in the Chrysler building, and I hadn't called them in a few months, so I decided to call them again. And and the person who picked up the phone, if I see if I can get this right, she said, Dancer Fitzgerald and Sample, Compton and Compton, Saatchi and Saatchi, Dorland Worldwide, may I help you? This really ridiculously long name. And it was a result of all these mergers. Now, eventually they changed the name to something else, something simpler. But that told me, all these mergers that were going on. Well, with all these mergers going on and all these agencies under a huge corporate umbrella, there became an opportunity to get more efficient media buying. Imagine you are an advertising space or a time salesperson. Let's say you're working at CVS, and I want to come and buy, let's say 50 30-second spots for, I have one client. You would respond by pulling out something called the rate card. It's a list of all the rates, that what it costs to advertise on which shows and what time, and you would apply that. Very, very straightforward. However, if I came in and I said, I actually represent many big brands. Let's say I represent McDonald's and General Motors and Nikon and Nike and I list a whole bunch of brands, and I'm going to buy a lot of advertising. Then it becomes a negotiation. The salesperson is not going to pull out the rate card or at least apply it because this person coming in will want a quantity discount. Media buying groups are also very good at calculating and analyzing the most efficient buys. For instance, as an example, and this is a somewhat simplistic example, I was with one company and many years ago, and we had presented a media plan, and this one person came up and said, you know, what we ought to do is we ought to advertise on Seinfeld, which is then, I think, the number one show on television, Seinfeld. And so I know that's a really bad idea. I said, why? It's the number one show. Yes, but we were going after a very specific demographic. It was actually a non-urban demographic where the majority of Seinfeld viewers were people in cities or the suburbs. We were actually going after a rural audience. And so we would be wasting a lot of money trying to reaching these urban and suburban people. So we went with a show called Ag Day, and in individual markets. It was much more efficient for us than to try to buy Seinfeld or any large show. And a media buying group would know all this stuff, and they would be able to analyze it with great efficiency to get the maximum amount of coverage and the maximum amount of eyeballs or ears for the money that's being spent. There's some other types of agencies. A public relations agency. PR agencies tend to be separate, although sometimes they are associated with full service ad agencies. Generally, it's probably a good idea, since it's a different skill set, to have your public relations agency separate from your ad agency. I worked for a company where we had both under one roof, and I was not happy with what the public relations agency was doing, or at least the public relations part of the company was doing. And other people in the company agreed with me, so we fired them. But we kept the ad agency part, and they were in St. Louis, and I remember flying out there and to meet with our ad agency, and having to wave and say hello to the people we had fired a month before. It was really kind of awkward. So generally, you want to keep that separate. I mean, many agencies will have an associated PR agency, like in another building, and kind of try to steer them to their sister agency. And you can assume that they are under the holding group, the media buying holding group for the agencies. They're trying to cross-refer business. You will have sometimes what's called a direct marketing agency, sometimes called a database agency. Many of them are probably called digital agencies now. They focus with direct marketing and digital marketing. And they're heavy use of databases, and they're analyzing the response rates and responding to them. And we'll talk more about this in a later lecture. Then we have production companies, and all these other agencies I've met, from boutique agency to direct marketing agency, with the exception of the media buying group, can all be folded into a full service ad agency, because a full service ad agency could do a lot of that stuff. Production companies, they tend not to. And by production, I mean the people who actually produce, in a physical sense, produce the ads. And these are production specialists, such as photographers and illustrators. And why don't I just hire an illustrator? If I'm a big full service ad agency and I've got enough work, why don't I just hire my own photographer on staff? And the same with illustrators. Well, the reason is that you will want, for different projects, you will want different types of photographers. There are a lot of them specialized. Some are, there's some very good food photographers, and others are specialized in photographing like fashion. Others are good still life photographers. Some are, great location photographers. And the same thing with illustrators. There are illustrators of various styles. Some do very cartoonish types of things. Some do, very realistic. Others do, much more impressionistic type of work. So you want to get just the right illustrator or just the right photographer for your project. So you best not to keep them on staff. Hire them, and that way they can go out and work for other people. It's actually much more efficient. You do have the option of going to stock agencies, where you can license photography very inexpensively. Same with illustrations and music. However, of course, if you license something, somebody else can license the same image. And I've seen the same image in different ads for different types of products. Uh, Occasionally you can negotiate exclusive rights, but that's becoming harder and harder because the trend for the agencies is going to something called royalty free. Once you buy the rights, you get to use it for as much as you like. Doesn't mean it's free. It just means you're free from having to purchase the rights again. You don't actually purchase ownership of the photography or the illustration and the music. You just purchase the right to use it in your materials, in your ads or in a book or whatever it is that you're doing. Then we have the talent. This is actually a term they use for anyone who appears or is heard in an ad. So actors, models, voiceover people do narrations. It's always funny. I've worked with a lot of voiceover people. They never look like what they sound. That's sort of funny. Stylists, people who will make things look in a certain way, hair, makeup. Food stylists, people who make that food look mouth-watering. And it's kind of funny that not all food in ads is actually that edible. If you want something to look luscious, you might smear vegetable oil on it. Actually, one problem is ice cream. It melts under warm lights, hot lights. Unless it is actually an ice cream ad, an ad for the ice cream is the product being sold. Let's say you had a model holding an ice cream cone, but it's not about the ice cream. That ice cream will probably be colored Crisco because it won't melt in the way that ice cream will. And you don't want to take a bite of Crisco, I don't think. And there's all sorts of other tricks to make food look luscious under the long time it does. So there's actually a video on how they actually photograph Big Macs. There is a rule, of course, you cannot put anything into the food that does not appear if you buy a Big Mac, but you can manipulate it a little. You can push the patty forward. You can, what they do is with the cheese, they lay the cold cheese in, and then they use a hairdryer to melt the corner of the cheese to make it look a little bit more appetizing. So there's these little tricks that they can do, and obviously there are legal limits. There's certain things they can't do. But if you're going to do a food ad, you want to get a food stylist. Prop houses, if you need certain things, like you need something that looks authentic from a particular era. Let's say a 1950s typewriter or a car that looks like it's from the 1930s. There are various prop houses and specialists who can do this. People love animals, and for that you need animal handlers and animal trainers. And that's always, they say never work with children and animals, but people love animals and people love children, so they're both done in there. Obviously, if you're doing video, whether it's a commercial or something else, you need directors and producers. If you're doing something on a particular location, you need location agents and scouts. Many location agents have lists they're like an agent for an actor or a model. They're agents for properties. And scouts can go look at places that maybe aren't on the lists of their agents. For instance, years ago, I believe it was either Avon or Revlon, I can't remember, one of the cosmetic companies. We needed a place that looked like a European, I don't say a castle, but a European mansion. And we've actually found a great place. It was called Falaise out in Long Island. And so we transported everyone out there and we shot there. Sometimes you need a house that looks typically American, whatever typically American means. So you can do that. And you get these specialists to do that. film and video editors and special effects people and things like that. More and more special effects are being used. Any sort of post-production specialist, music, that sort of thing. Trying to think of any other. Oh, yeah, I mean, like if you're doing film, you need electricians and lighting people and caterers and that sort of thing. So there's always production specialists. I forgot, not on the list, model makers. If you need something that doesn't exist, you can actually get somebody to make a model. We actually wanted a gold bar with our product's logo embedded into it, embossed into it. And there was somebody who was willing to make that. It was they used brass, not gold, and they actually knew how to cut our logo into the bar. And I think that cost us like $1,000, which actually was fairly cheap for that kind of prop. Anyway, so moving on. If you're developing a promotional plan, there needs to be certain steps to be taken. Obviously, the first thing you need to do is identify the target audience. Who are you trying to communicate to? Who is going to have to decode your message? Are they current users who you're trying to make sure they keep using the product or maybe get them to use more? Are they potential buyers, people who have never used your product, but you want to entice them to give it a trial and evaluate it? Maybe it's influencers, people who won't actually use the product themselves, but are trying to influence. But you need them to influence other people, like doctors, for prescriptions. In many countries, you're not allowed to promote pharmaceutical products to the general public. The United States is an exception to that. However, you can promote them to doctors, and obviously, doctors are the key influencers in deciding what prescription you should take. I mentioned earlier about government advertising, and mostly in the military. There was a campaign years ago during the Gulf and Iraq wars. Sorry, not the Gulf, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, very early in the beginning. Initially, after 9/11, there was a lot of patriotism and people volunteering, but also after a while, people didn't want to join the military because they realized they'd probably end the 90% chance they'd end up in one or two wars going on. And one of the biggest groups they discovered that was interfering with enlistments were parents. The parents of, the military was looking for like, 17, 18 to 21-year-olds to enlist. And often it was the parents who were the people who were influencing them in the opposite direction. So they actually targeted parents of prospective soldiers to do that. Sometimes you just might want to communicate with the public in general, and this might get a little closer to public relations, but to present the image. And there's a lot of, you can do this corporate advertising. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about public relations. All right, once you've determined your audience, then what's your objective? Are you simply trying to make them aware of the product? It's a new product, or are you trying to emphasize, to suggest a preference that they should choose your product over somebody else's? Or are you simply trying to emphasize the unique selling proposition? It's better, it's more comfortable, it's lighter, whatever that unique selling proposition is. Okay, so now you've got your target audience and you've picked your objective. So you also now need to determine a budget. How much are you willing to spend? And this, of course, is always a challenge. Obviously, clients want to spend less. Ad agencies want you to spend more. And then you need to actually design the message. Somebody actually has to write the copy, do the art direction, and also determine what media you're going to go in. And that goes hand in hand. If you're going to do a television commercial, you have to write the television commercial, as opposed to if you're doing a print ad, then you have to write the print ad, and those are written differently. They might have the same communications objective, but they will have the actual text will be different. And obviously, if you're doing something visual, that has to be worked out as well. And, we'll move on. And then eventually you have to evaluate the effectiveness of the campaign. Did this campaign make a difference? Did it increase sales? Did it increase awareness? And this is where you go back to the communication objective. Did it achieve that objective? If it didn't, then you have to figure out why, and you evaluate that, and you do some market research and show where do we go wrong or where do we go right. And that's essentially the steps in the broad strokes in developing a promotional plan. In terms of communications objectives, and I've kind of touched on it already, you might want to generate awareness. And to get people aware, you need to maybe repeat your ad a whole bunch of times, or maybe use really catchy slogans or jingles. Jingles are musical pieces. And they usually kind of get stuck in the ear. Often, many jingles actually follow the melody of songs we already know. In some cases, like nursery rhymes, things like that. Or maybe there's some stunt you can pull that will get everyone's attention. Maybe you're trying to give people knowledge, particularly things if it's a high engagement product in terms of knowledge. You might provide people with brochures so they can read it and understand it. If a product is a little bit more complex, might require personal selling or public relations. Okay, that might be the way to go. If you're trying to generate desire for the product, you might focus on the unique selling proposition. Try to generate sex appeal ads. People do respond to those. I mean, as long as they're not too blatant. This is why we pick attractive people to appear in our ads, even though it may not be overtly sexual. Humor works very well. You put people in a good mood. That gives a reason for people to remember the advertising. And in many times, you might just do a slice of life ad, showing people, hanging out together, using the product. The product has a positive effect on them, that sort of thing. Purchase, we're trying to encourage purchase. We're trying to encourage trial. Things that help are like point of sale or point of purchase displays, POS or POP displays. Coupons, those little promotional incentives, sales promotions to get people to buy. Maybe free samples. Oh, this tastes great. I'll buy some more. And maybe sometimes you're trying to generate loyalty, and this is where direct marketing works very well, where you send out an offer, the customer responds to the offer, and by what offer they respond to, that determines what your next offer is going to be, and you kind of build up a relationship with the customer and get them loyal to the product. So the objective will determine the approach you take. Now, there are some advertising challenges. You must deliver recall. People must remember these ads. Now, there's two types of recall, aided recall and unaided recall. Unaided is preferable, and that is, if I ask you to name a detergent, 95% of you are going to say Tide. And that's an example of unaided recall. Now, if I instead said, do you know these brands? And I listed Tide and several other brands, I'm kind of cluing you in, but you recognize them, you recall them, that would be aided recall. So obviously unaided recall is preference. And how do we do that? Well, we try to show our ads a lot. We try maybe use those jingles, that sort of thing. We also need to break through the clutter. We live in the information age where we are constantly being bombarded by all sorts of messages. Of a day, how many ads do you see online? If you're traveling, how many billboards do you see? You're walking down the corridors of the college. There will be all sorts of messages. They won't necessarily all be ads, but they will be messages. And we are constantly being bombarded with messages. In fact, this is why we have spam filters. And we actually learn to ignore all the messages. So how do we break through that? Well, by doing something amazing, an ad that is outrageous, something like that. Okay, congratulations. You've just created an ad that has broken through the clutter. Congratulations, you've also added to the clutter. If you look at ads from decades ago, they were fairly simple. They were not particularly outrageous, but they worked very well. However, because we are in a information inundated world, that's harder and harder. How do I get your attention when everyone else is trying to get your attention, even if they're not direct competitors? So we can take various approaches, and there is some pull strategy versus push strategy, or push versus pull. In a push strategy, you're trying to convince the distribution channel members to accept product, to buy product, to sell into the distribution pipeline. They are your customers, and so it's obvious that you want to advertise to them. However, they're not going to consume the product. They want to resell it. So that's why you want to adopt a pull strategy. You want to convince consumers, the end users, to purchase product from your distributors. You want somebody pulling the product through the pipeline, and then you also want to push it into the pipeline. And you need to do both. Now, the question is, how much do you spend on each side? It depends upon how in demand the product is, and what is the strength of the distributor. How much do they affect how much the consumer buys? Is this a product that consumers are just chomping at the bit to get? Well, then you don't need to spend as much on push strategy. Your distributors will seek you out. However, if it is not a broadly known product, where maybe you need sales clerks to guide people to it, then maybe you want to spend more money on and more effort and energy on push strategy. You want to be aware of both of these, and you do a combination of both. Again, it depends. It depends upon the market. So we need to appeal to the people we're advertising to, and there are different types of appeals. Logical, rational appeals. We might want to do an emotional appeal. Emotions are very, very strong. Emotions are, in terms of our brain development, emotions are much older than rational or thinking or logic. Think of animals. They have small brains, but they react very emotionally. Yes, there is a little bit of logic in them, but they run away from things even if they don't have to. And we often know that we are sometimes ruled by our emotions, and we have to be very careful about that. But and we also have moral appeals that we sometimes will use. That it's your obligation, as a rational human being, as a moral human being, an ethical human being, to do what we're saying in our ad. Emotional and rational are probably the ones that we focus on the most. We look at this ad, and not all of you are going to get it, because this has a very specific target market. This is targeted primarily towards moms or parents in general. If you have young kids, you will understand that it's sometimes very difficult to get them to eat breakfast. Little kids don't necessarily want to eat right away. And if you have to get them out to school, you've got to get them to eat, because if they decide they need to eat later, it's too late. And the Quaker Oats Company makes oatmeal, and I'm a big fan of oatmeal. I eat it all the time. However, little kids, and actually many adults, are not big fans of oatmeal. However, so Quaker Oats came up with these various products, bars and bites and things like that, which are almost like cookies. Um, and if you read the headline here, it says, "Let's end the daily breakfast bouts." And you have a photograph here. It's a child's level of a kitchen, and we have the oven mitts that represents mom, and then we have the boxing gloves that represents the kids, and it's this bout. You can imagine a mother saying, "You have to eat your breakfast before you go to school," and kids don't necessarily want to do what their mom wants to. And then you have the book bag, which I guess that also represents the kid. And this, if you are a parent who've experienced this, this is a very real thing in your life. And yeah, maybe instead of trying to get them to eat oatmeal or something else, I could give them these oatmeal bars, or these oats are actually a very good food. Um, so if I give them the bites or the bars, it's like eating cookies, and then I'm not having a fight anymore. I mean, most kids will not object to you having cookies for breakfast. They're not cookies, but they're almost like cookies. So this is a very emotional. There's a little bit of logic to it, but also it's somewhat emotional. Uh, we talked about developing our message, but we also have to choose our media. We have many media choices. Print ads. Now, print, of course, has been on the decline, but it is not dead in any way. Newspapers and magazines. Newspapers tend to have lower print production. Newspapers are mostly in black and white. Even in black and white, the blacks are not really black, and the white is just as white as the newsprint is. Magazines usually have a much better reproduction. As if I've done an ad and I want a tear sheet, I want it from a magazine. Tear sheet isn't just an ad that's been removed from the publication. A sample. Um, Magazines have much better, in terms of the paper and the ink, much better reproduction. However, newspapers, you can if you want to place if I want to place an ad in tomorrow's, let's say, the Newark Star Ledger, and when I've contacted them, I could probably have it there for tomorrow, as long as I have the ad ready, because they do this every day. Magazines usually publish every week or every month. They need a little bit more time because they have to schedule the presses and things like that. So, and like magazines hang around for a long time. So this, if you want your message to hang around for a long time, that's a great idea. Obviously, television, we have network television and local channels. Again, depending upon, are you a local business or you're more of a national business? Cable. Cable enables us to do what we've never been able to do before, and that is to geographically segment. So if you are in one zip code and I'm in another, they could show the ad. We're watching the same show at the same time, and one ad comes to you and a different ad might come to me. So because maybe one advertiser is interested in people in my area and other people are interested advertisers in your area. So we can do this, and it makes advertising much more efficient and much more effective that way. Radio has been declared dead several times. When television came out, they said, "Oh, radio's out." When the internet came, they said, "Radio's out." However, radio survives, and radio has one ability that other medias don't. You can actually listen to it while you're driving. You can't watch television while you're driving. Please never watch television while you're driving, because it's really distracted driving. You can't read newspapers or magazines while you do. You shouldn't be online, certainly, when you're doing it. But you can listen to the radio and radio ads. Obviously, you're limited to the audio, but you can still get through to people, particularly during drive time, early morning, and then 4 to 7 o'clock. Outdoor, or sometimes referred to as out of home. We're talking about billboards, posters on the side of subways or buses, or in subway stations, or on the side of buses. on any wall that is outside the home. And obviously we're talking about, posters and billboards, that sort of thing, which gets a lot of eyeballs, although doesn't discriminate with, who those eyeballs are, what kind of people they are, but can be very effective. Often they're used for advertising, like locations. When I was driving down to Florida one time, I saw a lot of billboards for Disney World. Headed in that direction, we'll grab them. Websites, obviously there are a lot of websites out there, and you can put up banner ads, and you can measure the click-through rate. Point of purchase displays, again, these are displays in the store just before purchase, so they will encourage a little bit more, especially for impulse sales. And then we have collateral. Collateral generally means something not originally intended. Like in the military, they do a bombing campaign and then they talk about collateral damage. It was not intended, not desired. Now, it seems like a strange way to describe this. Think about this, the print, the TV, radio, all the others. An ad agency makes a lot of its money because of the ad space, the media space or time it buys. Generally, most agencies receive a 15% commission. So if, let's say, a TV station says we want $1,000 for a 30-second spot at a particular time, the client would be charged $1,150. The industry is set up that way. I actually had an issue where I was foregoing the agency commission because I have a boutique agency. It's kind of an unusual situation. I actually voluntarily, because I was being compensated in a different way, I said I'll forego the agency commission, and that threw I think it was a magazine, threw the magazine off. So no, it's okay. I had to explain. Yeah, so all of it, but however, and actually this kind of applies to point of purchase as well. But brochures and details. A brochure is a lot of information folded up on a piece of paper, or you've seen those. A detailer is a piece that might be used by a salesperson, like you have a chart that somebody, it's like kind of a visual aid. There's no media on this. You're not paying somebody else, you're just printing stuff up. So for collateral materials, they would charge the costs, but they're not making the same amount of money. A lot of large agencies don't really want to deal with collateral materials, brochures and detailers. In fact, really large agencies, if they're asked to do it, they'll outsource it maybe to a boutique agency. Or if they do it just because they're getting a lot of money in another part of the ad buy. And actually, many boutique agencies will take this on. They don't mind that because they're not generally getting the same media commissions that a larger agency is getting. There are a number of media decisions that have to be made. Media class, what type of media you're using, and we've already talked about these, print, TV, internet, and this is very important because you have to figure out what you're going to make. If you're going to make a TV spot, you're going to make a radio spot, you're going to make a print ad. Interesting about print ads, let's say a full-size print ad. Not every magazine is the same size. Originally, when I started, I thought every magazine was 8.5 by 11. It's not. Sometimes it's 8 1/4 by 10 3/4. It's, every magazine is a little bit different. So we always have to make slightly different versions for each magazine. Then the media vehicle, and the media vehicle is the specific publication or program that you're putting the ad into. So it might be, I'm going to put it in New Yorker magazine, or the Wall Street Journal, whatever the specific publication, or the specific program. Maybe it's doing TV, that's the class, but I'm going to do it on America's Got Talent, or NCIS, or whatever the program is. The specific time and date and the actual program. That's the media. The program or the publication is the media vehicle. And you don't want to mix these two up. It will be on the exam. Don't mix up media class and media vehicle. Understand the difference between the two. Also the size and the length. I don't actually have, I don't know if I have a magazine here, but you can have a full page ad. Let's see, I'm gonna pretend that this textbook is a magazine. Obviously, a full page ad would cover the entire page. A fractional would just be a part of the page, and fractionals come in all sizes: half page, 1/3 page, 2/3 page, 2/3 vertical, 2/3 horizontal, 5/8. It's I can't keep track of them all, but it's all on the rate card. You ask the publication for their rate card, and they will tell you what they're offering. Or you can have a 2-page spread. You know, it would cover both pages. So it would be a horizontal ad, and you have to be careful about where the gutter is. That's the break in the middle. But and people will argue which is better, a 2-page spread or a full-page ad. Some people say 2-page spread because it's a bigger ad, it makes a bigger impact. I personally tend to lean towards a full-page ad, even though it's smaller. On a 2-page ad, so the ad is always on the right. The content is on the left. So I figure somebody will be reading the content. That's why people buy magazines, and the ad will be there for them. I don't say that with any authority. Different people have different feelings about it. So you won't be aware of it. There is also buying the cover, and which seems strange. You're not actually buying the front cover, and actually there are 4 covers in a magazine. So the front is called cover 1, and you can almost never buy that. It has happened a few times, but it's not something generally done. So the inside of the front cover is called cover 2. Okay, and then the back cover is called cover 3, and the outside of the back is called cover 4. My personal feeling is that the best purchase is cover 4. It's actually on the outside of the magazine. I had a boss who disagreed with me. He said the best thing is cover 2. My feeling is that if the magazine is face down, or if I'm reading it, then not someone else gets to see it. I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong. It's an opinion. You also would prefer to be towards the front of the magazine, but whether you're at the front of the magazine or near the front or near the back, usually depends upon how loyal an advertiser you are. I remember I did an ad in a Metropolitan magazine. I was really excited the first time in a major magazine. But it was a one-off fractional, and they put us towards the back. And it just, if there had been a commitment for an ongoing ads every issue, then I know we would have been moved closer to the front. Also, if we were fractionals tend to be pushed towards the back, full pages or 2-page spreads tend to be pushed towards the front. So a little bit there about media. Also, we have in terms of TV and radio, generally there are 30-second spots or 50-second spots, or 60-second spots. You can do either one. Obviously, the 60 seconds cost more. So and there is the thing where you can buy a 60-second spot, and then you might have experiences where then all of a sudden the subsequent spots are shorter, and you remember the parts that you're not seeing, and that's a great technique because it's like they're buying a 30-second spot but getting the effect of a 60-second spot. So also message weight, reach and frequency. How many people are you reaching, and how many times do you reach them? And there's a calculation here for GRP called gross rating points. It's reach times frequency. And let's say 40,000 GRP means you could either reach 40,000 people once, or one person 40,000 times. Kind of difficult actually, it's neither of those. It's actually something in between. So I always ask for the reach and frequency figures. Timing is important. When is this ad going to appear? What time of day? What time of year? You want to pay attention to that. Also, the continuity. Is it continuous, flighting, or pulsing? Continuous is, as you might guess, continue at the same frequency day after day, same number of times. Flighting is where you break it up into 2-week intervals. It could be 3, but generally 2. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. The reason you would want to do this is because people sometimes get sick and tired of seeing an ad. Also, it costs a lot more. So flighting is actually a very commonly used technique. And then we have pulsing, and pulsing is for people who, for some reason, don't feel they can do flighting. They don't want their ad to go away completely. I'm not a big fan of pulsing, but there are people who do it. Okay, that's the end of this this lecture. If you have any questions, you can send an email, and don't forget to do the activities, simulations, and so forth for this module. Take care.